Accelerate.
For example, the driver accelerated to merge onto the highway.
Apply.
For example, the painter applies the finishing touches to his masterpiece.
Argue.
For example, the lawyer argued her case in court.
Ascend.
For example, the hiker ascends the steep mountain trail.
Bake.
For example, she bakes delicious cookies every weekend.
Bark.
For example, the dog barked loudly at the mailman.
Braked.
For example, the driver braked suddenly to avoid the pedestrian.
Built.
For example, the young engineer built a bridge.
Capture.
For example, he captured breathtaking images.
Carve.
For example, the sculptor is carving a stunning piece from marble.
Chase.
For example, the cat is chasing the mouse.
Chop.
For example, the chef chops vegetables with precision.
Climb.
For example, the cat climbed the tree to escape the dog.
Coded.
For example, she coded an innovative new application.
Cook.
For example, the chef is cooking a delicious meal.
Compete.
For example, the athletes will compete in the marathon.
Compose.
For example, he is composing a beautiful symphony.
Count.
For example, the cashier is counting the money in the register.
Crawl.
For example, the baby crawled across the room.
Cut.
For example, her finger was cut when she was cutting onions.
Dance.
For example, she is dancing gracefully across the stage.
Debate.
For example, the politician is debating the issue with her opponent.
Design.
For example, the architect designed a modern skyscraper.
Discover.
For example, scientists discovered a new species of insect.
Donate.
For example, she donates her old clothes to the local charity.
Dive.
For example, the swimmer dove into the pool.
Drink.
For example, he drinks a cup of hot tea.
Draw.
For example, the girl is drawing her family beautifully.
Embrace.
For example, he embraced his long-lost friend with tears in his eyes.
Enroll.
For example, he decided to enroll in an online course to improve his skills in English.
Eat.
For example, they like to eat at home.
Escape.
For example, he celebrated his escape from his boring job with a long vacation.
Examine.
For example, the scientist examines the specimen under a microscope.
Exercise.
For example, it's important to exercise every day.
Explain.
For example, the teacher explains the complex concept to the students.
Feed.
For example, we feed the plants with a special fertilizer twice a week.
Fight.
For example, they fight each other. It's terrible.
Fix.
For example, the mechanic fixed the car's engine.
Fly.
For example, the bird flew high in the sky.
Giggle.
For example, the children giggle as they watch the funny movie.
Grade.
For example, the teacher graded the papers.
Hike.
For example, we spent the afternoon hiking around the lake.
Hug.
For example, we hugged briefly, and then it was time to say goodbye.
Investigate.
For example, the journalist investigated his story in depth.
Jump.
For example, the athlete jumped over the hurdle.
Kick.
For example, he escaped by kicking open the window.
Kiss.
For example, she kissed him good night.
Knead.
For example, the baker is kneading the dough to make bread.
Laugh.
For example, they laughed at her jokes.
Launch.
For example, we will launch the new product next month.
Listen.
For example, she is listening the story of his brother's travel.
Make.
For example, I'm making a cake for my sister's birthday.
Meditate.
For example, she was meditating and reaching a higher state of consciousness.
Memorize.
For example, she memorizes the important topic for the history exam.
Motivate.
For example, the coach is motivating his team before the big game.
Navigate.
For example, the pilot is navigating the plane through turbulent skies.
Paint.
For example, my uncle is painting a beautiful landscape.
Performance.
For example, the actor performed a monologue in front of the audience.
Pirouetted.
For example, the dancer pirouetted across the stage.
Plant.
For example, the gardener plants flowers in the spring.
Play.
For example, the children is playing hide and seek in the park.
Pounce.
For example, the cat will pounce on the unsuspecting mouse.
Present.
For example, he is presenting a new idea.
Produce.
For example, the director produced a critically acclaimed film.
Proofread.
For example, the editor proofread the manuscript thoroughly.
Prune.
For example, the gardener prunes the rose bushes to encourage growth.
Publish.
For example, Melanie published her first novel.
Punish.
For example, he was punished for lying.
Read.
For example, she read a book while eating.
Recycle.
For example, he always recycles his plastic bottles and cans.
Repair.
For example, the mechanics are repairing the engine of the broken down car.
Rescue.
For example, the firefighter is rescuing the cat from the tree.
Ride.
For example, she is riding on her horse very well.
Run.
For example, I run about 3 miles every morning.
Sing.
For example, she sings in the choir every Sunday.
Savor.
For example, she savors the taste of the delicious dessert.
Sew.
For example, the tailor sewed a dress.
Scribble.
For example, she scribbles her notes hastily before the meeting begins.
Sleep.
For example, she sleeps with 2 pillows.
Sky.
For example, he skied down the hill.
Snap.
For example, the photographer snapped a photo.
Soar.
For example, the bird soars gracefully through the sky.
Sell.
For example, the salesperson sold a product.
Solve.
For example, he couldn't solve the math problem.
Speak.
For example, she and I spoke this morning.
Splash.
For example, the children splash playfully in the swimming pool.
Sprint.
For example, the athlete sprinted toward the finish line.
Strum.
For example, he strums his guitar gently under the moonlight.
Study.
For example, the students studied for the upcoming exam.
Surf.
For example, he learned to surf when he was living in California.
Swim.
For example, she swam laps in the pool.
Teach.
For example, she enjoys teaching her students about history.
Think.
For example, I think it's time for me to do my homework.
Toddle.
For example, the toddler toddled around the room.
Toss.
For example, the chef tosses the vegetables in the wok to stir-fry them.
Touch.
For example, her tiny hands gently touched my face.
Train.
For example, the coach trained the team for the upcoming competition.
Trek.
For example, the explorer trekked through the dense jungle.
Twirl.
For example, the dancer twirls gracefully on the stage.
Whisk.
For example, the chef is whisking the eggs until they are fluffy.
Wipe.
For example, the cleaner wiped down the table.
Write.
For example, he writes poetry in his spare time.
Win.
For example, the team won the championship game.
Walk.
For example, I take a walk with my dog in the evening.
Wash.
For example, we are washing all the dishes.
Cry.
For example, she is crying after watching the movie.
Work.
For example, he works part-time at the restaurant.